Microphone for the chair, please. Microphone for the chair.
Y Geneva, che Estados Unidos, Matios Chivey, Guanojel. Muy buenas tardes.
So, good afternoon to you all. Members of the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the CERD, welcome to the distinguished members of the United States delegation. Welcome to civil society and the representatives of the indigenous nations of the United States. We begin meeting number 2299 of the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, during which we shall be considering the reports, combined periodic reports 7 to 9 of the United States of America. The delegation of the United States is headed by the distinguished Ambassador Kate Harper, a friend I have known for many years now. So for me, it's a considerable honor to have the first indigenous ambassador of the United States and the first indigenous person to represent the US in the United Nations, Mr. Keith Harper. This afternoon, this is how we shall proceed. First of all, we'll hear the introduction of the report of the United States. And you will have between 30 and 35 minutes to make that introduction to the report, after which we'll give the floor to the country rapporteur, who is Mr. Amir today. After Mr. Amir has taken the floor, the other members of the committee will take the floor and each according to their own interest and sphere of expertise will have at the most 7 minutes to put their questions and queries to the US delegation. So once again, Ambassador, welcome, and you have the time I referred to before to introduce the US combined periodic reports. You have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, distinguished members of the committee, representatives of civil society, ladies and gentlemen, I am Ambassador Keith Harper, the representative of the United States to the United Nations Human Rights Council. The United States strongly supports the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. We do so in the context of our commitment to build a country and a world characterized, as President Obama has said, by, quote, a just peace based on inherent rights and dignity of every individual. It is therefore with great pleasure for me to appear before you today and present an experienced senior-level delegation from the United States. We are here to discuss with you the most recent U.S. periodic report on the implementation of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. The members of this delegation are honored to be here to share information with the committee, civil society, Native American tribes, and the public on how our convention obligations are implemented in the United States. I plan to make short remarks, after which I will turn the floor over to Paula Schrafer, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Bureau of International Organization Affairs. Following Paula, two of our colleagues from the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, Ms. Loretta Lynch, and Mr. Mark AppelHath, Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, will provide remarks as well, followed by Ms. Catherine Lamont, Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the Department of Education, who also will address the committee with short opening statement. Finally, our distinguished colleagues from the state and local governments, Arkansas Attorney General Dustin McDaniel and Mayor William Bell from Birmingham, Alabama will make short statements as well. The United States is a vibrant, multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multicultural democracy in which individuals are protected against discrimination based on race, color, national origin under the Constitution and federal laws, as well as under the Constitution and laws of the states and other governmental units. As noted in our report, the United States has made great strides towards eliminating racial discrimination. This progress is reflected in many levels of our society, as well as will be elaborated further by my colleagues on our delegation. But one notable indicator of this is our country's political leadership. 30 years ago, the idea of having an African American president would not have seemed possible. Today, it is reality. The nation's top law enforcement officer, our Attorney General, is also African American. 3 of the last 5 secretaries of state have been women, and 2 have been African American. We have appointed Justice Sotomayor, the first Latina Supreme Court Justice. As a member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, I am proud to be the first Native American to be U.S. Ambassador to the UN Human Rights Council. On a related note, I would like to congratulate the chairperson of this committee as the first indigenous chairperson of a human rights treaty body. While we have made visible progress that is reflected in the leadership of our society, we recognize that we have much left to do. Issues covered by the convention are of such fundamental and deep importance that we must continue to make progress. For this reason, we value the opportunity for dialogue with the committee. We hope and expect it to generate new ideas, to identify new ways to address persistent challenges, and to assist as in our ongoing efforts to improve. And for that, we are grateful to the committee. With that, I am honored to turn it over to Paula Schrafer, Deputy Assistant Secretary, to make some opening remarks and to introduce the members of our delegation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Keith. Mr. Chairperson, distinguished members of the committee, esteemed representatives of civil society organizations, ladies and gentlemen. I am Paula Schrafer, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of International Organization Affairs. I am very pleased to be here with the U.S. delegation to discuss the United States implementation of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, especially as this year marks the 20th anniversary of when we ratified the convention back in 1994. The composition of our delegation is a testament to the seriousness with which my government takes this presentation. Our delegation represents 9 agencies of the U.S. federal government, as well as 2 distinguished representatives from state and local governments, with which the federal government shares responsibility for implementing U.S. obligations under the convention. Let me now introduce the members of the delegation who will be addressing you today. From the Department of State, Sabina Rajpal, Acting Assistant Legal Advisor for Human Rights and Refugees. Scott Busby, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. From the Department of Justice, Loretta Lynch, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. Mark AppelHath, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division. Catherine Stevens, Senior Counsel and Director of International Programs, Civil Rights Division. From the Department of Education, Catherine Lehman, Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights. From our state and local level, Dustin McDaniel, the Attorney General of Arkansas, and William Bell, Mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. From the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Brian Green, Deputy Assistant Secretary, Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. From the Department of the Interior, Lawrence Roberts, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Bureau for Indian Affairs. From the Department of Homeland Security, Veronica Venture, Deputy Officer for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and Ilana Au, Deputy Principal for Immigration Policy, Office of Policy. From the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Nadine Grazia, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Minority Health, and Dr. Kara James, the Director of the Office of Minority Health at the Centers for Medicine. From the Department of Labor, Jane Garrido, Attorney in the Solicitor's Office. And finally, last but not least, from the Environmental Protection Agency, Daniel E. Gogol, Environmental Protection Specialist with the Office of Environmental Justice. So over the next 2 days, you will hear from my colleagues on the delegation about the specific efforts our government is making to eliminate racial discrimination and to address disparities faced by racial and ethnic minorities in the United States. I would like to say just a few words about how we have also tried to improve the mechanisms through which we promote compliance with our human rights obligations domestically, a topic that we know is of particular concern to the committee. Over the last several years, under active White House leadership, the State Department has worked closely with many federal agencies and others to reinforce the importance of human rights obligations, including those set forth in the Convention and our daily work implementing domestic laws and policies. The reporting processes for the Convention and other human rights treaties, as well as the Universal Periodic Review, have helped create a core network of officials throughout the federal government who spread awareness of human rights obligations within their agencies and with other stakeholders. Through mechanisms such as the Equality Working Group, co-chaired by the Departments of State and Justice, we are trying to leverage that increased engagement to focus on concrete issues of implementation, not simply reporting. At the same time, given our federal system of government, implementation of our obligations under the Convention must be a true collective effort among federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. Communication and coordination with these federal government partners is critical, and we have stepped up efforts in this regard significantly since our 2008 presentation before this committee. In particular, we have increased our communications with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, both by providing information related to these treaties and their requirements, and requesting information relevant to implementation. The presence of the Attorney General McDaniel and Mayor Bell today is just one testament to this improved outreach. We have also worked to improve our outreach to the public and coordination with members of civil society who serve as vital partners and constructive critics in the implementation of our obligation. In addition to making public extensive amounts of information about our treaty obligations and our reporting activities, United States agencies engage in an ongoing dialogue with civil society. We have held several consultations with civil society specifically about our recent periodic report, and we look forward to future consultations. We greatly appreciate the efforts of civil society to coordinate and organize their concerns and recommendations, which inform our consideration of actions our government should take to improve implementation of our obligations. We look forward to our dialogue with the committee today and tomorrow, and are eager to hear and respond to your questions. Thank you again for this opportunity to discuss these critical issues to us. I now invite the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, the Honorable Loretta Lynch, to make additional remarks.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, distinguished members of the committee, representatives of civil society, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Loretta Lynch. I'm the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, and it is indeed an honor to be part of the U.S. delegation and share with you today some of the highlights of the Department of Justice effort to eliminate racial discrimination and uphold human rights in the area of criminal justice. Attorney General Eric Holder, indeed all of us at the Department of Justice who work on criminal justice issues, take seriously our obligation to protect the safety of all Americans and the security of our nation, to safeguard civil and human rights, to prevent and combat violent crime, financial fraud, and threats to the most vulnerable members of society, and to strengthen collaboration among government, law enforcement, and our community partners. As part of this mission, the Department has made great progress in reforming America's criminal justice system. Our focus is not just on the prosecution of crime, but on eradicating its root causes as well as providing support for those re-entering society after having paid their debt to it. There is, of course, much work still to be done. Currently, our country imprisons approximately 2.2 million people disproportionately people of color. This situation is a drain on both precious resources and human capital. The Attorney General is committed to reform of this aspect of our criminal justice system. Last August, the Attorney General announced the Smart on Crime initiative. Under this initiative, we are ensuring that stringent mandatory minimum sentences for certain federal drug crimes will now be reserved for the most serious criminals. This is not an abandonment of prison as a means to reduce crime, but rather a recognition that quite often less prison can also work to reduce crime. We are advancing alternative programs in place of incarceration in appropriate cases, and we are committed to providing formerly incarcerated people with fair opportunities to rejoin their communities and become productive, law-abiding citizens. As part of this effort, the Attorney General has directed every component of the Department of Justice to review proposed rules, regulations, or guidance with an eye to whether they may impose collateral consequences that may prevent reintegration into society. He has called upon state leaders to do the same, with a particular focus on enacting reforms to restore voting rights to those who have served their debt to society, thus ending the chain of permanent disenfranchisement that visits many of them. To further ensure that the elimination of discrimination is an ongoing priority, the Attorney General has created a racial disparities working group led by the United States community to identify policies that result in unwanted disparities within criminal justice and to eliminate those disparities as quickly as possible. From the reduction of the use of solitary confinement to the expansion of the federal clemency program to our support for the retroactive reduction of penalties for nonviolent drug offenders to the reduction in the sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine, we have worked to improve our criminal justice system in furtherance of our human rights treaty obligations. We look forward to the future and the opportunity to do even more. Mr. Chairperson, I thank you for the opportunity to discuss these issues with you and the committee. And I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, my friend and colleague, Mark AppelHath of the Department's Civil Rights Division. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lynch. Mr. Chairperson, distinguished members of the committee, representatives of civil society. My name is Mark AppelHath. I'm a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division at the United States Department of Justice. It's an honor to be a member of the U.S. delegation and share with you some of the Justice Department's work to address racial discrimination and to fulfill our obligations under the Convention. Since our founding, the people of the United States have strived to realize our Constitution's promise of equal opportunity and equal justice for all. Last month, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a landmark law that relegated the age of legal segregation to the history books. As President Johnson said, the Act's purpose was to ensure that all people are equal in the polling booths, in the classrooms, in the factories, and in hotels, restaurants, movie theaters, and other places that provide service to the public. Our nation has made great progress over the last 5 decades, but the journey is not yet complete. Our dialogue with this committee allows us to reflect on the great advances we have made as a nation to realize equality and to express our commitment to address the challenges that remain. 3 basic principles guide the Justice Department's work in realizing the noble goals of our Constitution and laws. Expanding opportunity for all, safeguarding the infrastructure of our democracy, and protecting the most vulnerable among us. Our ceaseless efforts to advance these principles directly enhance our country's implementation of its convention obligations. The right to vote is one of the most fundamental promises of our democracy. Among our highest priorities is ensuring equal access to the ballot box. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 has been our most powerful tool in this effort. While the U.S. Supreme Court recently invalidated part of this cornerstone civil rights law, we continue to use every legal tool available to take swift and certain action against jurisdictions that have hindered equal access to the franchise. For example, the Civil Rights Division is currently challenging discriminatory state election laws in North Carolina and Texas. Attorney General Holder also is taking steps to ensure that American Indians and Alaska Natives have meaningful access to the polls. The division continues to work to dismantle racial discrimination in our nation's schools to ensure that school districts fulfill their legal obligations to provide equal educational opportunity for all students. We also have targeted racial disparities in school discipline in an effort to end the school-to-prison pipeline. Working with our partners at the Department of Education, we issued guidance to inform schools nationwide of their responsibility to establish non-discriminatory policies and practices aimed at keeping young people in the classroom and out of the criminal justice system. This is just one of the many examples the committee will hear during a dialogue of how federal agencies work with state and local officials to advance our implementation of the convention. The Civil Rights Division and our federal partner agencies continue to handle a large volume of housing and employment discrimination complaints. This is a stark reminder that despite the end of legal segregation in our country, our work to combat unfair treatment must persist. Our robust enforcement efforts have produced tangible results to change people's lives. Just a few months ago, we obtained our largest ever settlement in an employment discrimination case involving the discriminatory hiring practices of the New York City Fire Department, which brought jobs to 290 eligible claimants and $98 million in monetary damages.